Hello everybody, welcome to Africa Awakened. Now we've seen in the last few months the Sahel region being seriously under serious political instability. One thing that has been evident is that most of the French colonized countries have opted to have coups where military leaders take power out of democratically elected leaders. But this is not in vain, because much of what these military leaders are doing is aligned to the desire of many Africans. We know that for decades, Africa has been held hostage by Western countries. And what is evident is that the Sahel region is full of good minerals. And these valuable minerals go to fund Western countries and leaving Africa poor. One of the prominent persons who has been talking over these issues is the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Giorgia Meloni has been in support of Africa, and one thing she says is that Africa must be allowed to have and enjoy resources that it has, and Western countries must desist from making Africa poor through its policies. Meloni singled out Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron is the French president, and we know that the policies that he's been having towards Africa and the policies that France has been having towards Africa have led to Africa being poor. We remember former French president, the comment from former French president Jacques Chirac, who said that without Africa, France will slide down into the rank of a third world power. What does this mean? Chirac saw that French people and presidents and governments, for that matter, have taken over Africa through conning policies. What former French president was saying is that France has always taken advantage of Africa and used its resources to the detriment of African population. Now, this is what Meloni has been saying. Meloni said categorically that there is no need of Africa getting poor when there are selected Western countries getting rich out of its own resources. Take a listen to how Meloni spoke against France and Emmanuel Macron.
Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron ci ha definiti vomitevoli, cinici, irresponsabili. E qui la stampa italiana a dire, hai visto che ha detto Macron, che siamo irresponsabili. Vergogna. Irresponsabile Emmanuel Macron sono quelli che hanno bombardato la Libia perché gli dava fastidio che l'Italia avesse un rapporto privilegiato in campo energetico con Gheddafi, esponendoci al caos migrazione nel quale ci troviamo. Cinici Emmanuel Macron sono i francesi che mandano la gendarmerie a rispedire indietro qualunque immigrato tenti di passare il confine a Ventimiglia. Ma soprattutto perché le cose vanno raccontate come si deve, vomitevole è chi... Buono, che lo vuoi tu? Ci hai mai tolto il pathos? Vomitevole è chi, come la Francia, continua a sfruttare l'Africa stampando moneta per 14 nazioni africane sulle quali applica il signoraggio, facendo lavorare bambini nelle miniere, estraendo materie prime come accade in Niger, dove la Francia estrae il 30% dell'uranio che gli serve a far camminare le centrali nucleari e il 90% dei nigerini vive senza elettricità. Non ci venire a fare lezioni, Macron, perché l'Africa scappa da voi e la soluzione non è spostare gli africani in Europa, è liberare l'Africa da certi europei. Non accettiamo lezioni. Chiaro?
One thing that has been evident is that every year, thousands of African immigrants enter Europe, and some of the countries that bear the brunt of these immigrants is Italy and also Spain. Now, Italy came out clearly and said that France is responsible for making conditions in Africa dilapidated and therefore increasing the rate of people who get into Europe. And therefore what they did is that they have reconsidered and relooked at their asylum laws, and they have also closed their borders for these boats that carry immigrants. They do not want that, and in fact they have diverted some of them to go to Spain and even to go to France for that matter. Many European countries and leaders have been struggling to implement border control measures and develop strategies that can ensure that the influx of immigrants is controlled. But this has always failed. The reason being, the West, specifically France, has always taken advantage of Africa. You've realized that most of these coups that are happening in Africa are happening in the countries that are largely colonized by France. And therefore, it is like Africans are rising over and are rising up against France and its colonial presidents, who are always put to power to ensure that they serve the interests of the French government. I know that French people are not involved in this, but specifically their governments have always developed policies to ensure that they disenfranchise Africa and get to gain from its resources. Listen to how Meloni castigated Emanuel Macron about the manner in which they are extracting minerals from the country and using it to enrich themselves at the expense of African population.
Questo è un bambino che lavora in una miniera d'oro in Burkina Faso. Il Burkina Faso è una delle nazioni più povere del mondo. Per il Burkina Faso, che ha l'oro, la Francia stampa moneta coloniale. In cambio pretende che finiscano nelle casse del tesoro francese il 50% di tutto quello che il Burkina Faso esporta. L'oro che questo bambino si infila in un cunicolo per tirare fuori finisce per lo più nelle casse dello Stato francese. Allora la soluzione non è prendere gli africani e spostarli in Europa, la soluzione è liberare l'Africa da certi europei che la sfruttano e consentire a queste persone di vivere di quello che hanno.
In the clip, it is evident that the Italian Prime Minister is accusing France for creating the problem of immigration in Europe. And one thing that he's saying is that France has exploited Africa and supported weak presidents so that they can continue to have opportunity to extract minerals from that country. Right now, most of these French colonies are getting to realize that France must get out of Africa. And that is why Meloni is also saying that it is not a time for Africans to get out of Europe, but it is a time to get some of European countries out of Africa to ensure that Africa gets an opportunity to develop itself. Many of the French colonies like Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali have seen coups in their territories, and therefore it is upon the African continent and leaders to get to understand the best way to support the nations that are having those coups. You do note that the African Union has remained silent about the atrocities that France and other Western countries are doing in Africa. Look at what happened in Libya. African Union has been accused of conspiring with the Western countries to hit at nations in Africa that want to develop on their own terms. For instance, you do note that right now, African Union has condemned Niger, it has condemned Burkina Faso, it has condemned Mali for an uprising that is aimed at ensuring that much of resources that are produced in Africa remain in Africa and are used to develop Africa to reach the developed status, as it were. So for me, I believe Africa must wake up and smell the coffee and get to resist the Western atrocities and infringements that they are doing in the continent. Thank you, and let's meet in our next African Stories. Goodbye.